Okay, beautiful. So the vision is to co-emerge. Well, this past weekend, I had a crop of well-being practitioners here in Winter Park, Colorado, and I gave a presentation. I had about 30 slides. And I'd say the presentation kind of took this arc of a perspective shift from problem to possibility, which I can briefly talk about in this recording. And then I would say the implications of that would be the next part of the talk. And then we get into generativity and regenerativity. So what's the creative potential for humanity, and also how do we heal and regenerate? So the vision is to, I gave this talk this weekend. I got a bunch of feedback. The talk's been iterated. I'd love to co-source and co-emerge it with you. I can frame it up and contextualize it, and also would like to contextualize you a little bit together emergently for anyone who hasn't heard this. And for this to be an ongoing, collectively sourced conversation where each iteration emerges new possibilities and views and potentials, and those kind of turn into, I've written, I think, 25 pages of a book now, and have this slide deck. So just a way that we can bring more attention to this. And specifically, we've launched our first cohort for our incubator of people who are actually realizing the world that we're illuminating as possible in this conversation. And so I'd like to help investors and people with resources and other folks in the world who are looking for a North Star to be able to see this conversation as a possibility for a collectively held North Star. And then also that there are, in real time, a collective of people in our incubator who are bringing about projects that are realizing the vision that we're holding for what's possible, both on the generative creative side and on the regenerative healing side.
Yep. So interesting, because I'm doing a presentation later today called The Skills of Liberation, but it's like next level healing, transformation, and liberation. So I think we're very aligned here in terms of making that shift from problem to solution, and that kind of next level solutions that don't have to dive into so much mess, basically, to work. There's such a better, different way of doing it. So that feels very timely.
Beautiful. Yeah. How fun.
I'm sure this conversation will feed into my later presentation.
Amazing. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the perspective shift that I'm inviting is just for people to notice that, I have this article coming out that says from SDGs to emerging probabilities. So if you're familiar with the World Bank SDGs,
very familiar with them. Everything in love too has to meet SDGs.
Yeah. And so what I'm inviting folks to notice is that several of the World Bank SDGs are problem oriented. For example, the first one of no poverty, the second one, no hunger. It might be the other way around.
Which is a very strange way to frame it, actually.
Yeah, totally. And so it feels to me like, that there's the systems we have on planet Earth, and then a lot of people doing the good work are wanting to fix these systems. And to me, the cool thing is, what if we put that whole game down and picked up the new game of what do we want to create from nothing? And so the shift from problem to possibility is subtle and yet very profound. So instead of no poverty and no hunger, we have this list of emerging probabilities that temporarily seem impossible. But the first one is that basic survival needs are met for every human being. And
yes, which does not seem impossible. I mean, it's absolutely possible for people to be able to be at least nutritiously fed. There's
totally
no reason for that not to happen.
And that's what I invite everyone, is just to notice and become aware that that's possible today. We're not lacking the technology or resources or anything. It's just that our systems on the planet are pointed towards different ends. And if we
our consciousness struggles with it a bit, I think.
Right, exactly.
For me, the systems and the consciousness are the two pieces that really need to shift, and they're part and parcel of each other.
Yeah, beautiful. Beautiful. Yeah. Yeah.
Seems like a good topic to me.
Yeah. And the second one is, right, so So I invite everyone just to notice that it's a consciousness challenge, it's a maturity challenge, and it's pointing our systems in a different direction. But we can do this right now. It's available to us right now.
Yes, and people are doing it. It's already happening. There are
Yeah.
many people on the planet who are building the new systems, which means we actually don't need to pay so much attention to the old ones, because they will simply lose power. We don't have to destroy them or punish them or spend a lot of energy on saying how completely and utterly wrong they are.
Totally.
We just bring power to better systems and they will gain traction.
Totally. Yeah, and so the second one is the human experience shifts from surviving to thriving. We're just playing a new game, right? If basic survival needs are met for every human being, the implications are not consequential. They're pretty drastic.
Yes.
and so almost anything you look at would likely be shifting. I mean, education, work, food, right? The community, the way that we interact with each other, the way we relate with reality and our life experience, kind of the purpose of life, you know, the way that we construct that and make meaning of our experience. And so I, you know, a few years ago, it must have been 4 years ago now, I had this big shift from let's look at the top problems in the world and pick which one to solve, to what's the creative future that we can collectively emerge together. And then you know, so from there, the two exciting conversations are the generative creative conversation of what is the light of all this? What might life look like? What's the heaven on earth experience that's, you know, we're all walking around in the Garden of Eden kind of thing, like that? What might that world look like? And then there's also the regenerative conversation around how do we do the trauma work with human beings, with the planet, the regenerative healing work, the processing and metabolizing of all the residual from hundreds of thousands of years of human experience, and sort of help us, what's the word I want to use? Transition and not take the past and keep putting it out into the future again, but actually emerge new moments.
For me, something that's really important is enabling a graceful transition, because very often, even in many healing and transformative processes, there's actually a lot of trauma created. That's been part of healing modalities. And I think that it's really important now. I see that we don't have room for that anymore. So we need this, a much more gentle process that's much more profound and more effective. It's not this massive healing crisis, or we have these spiritual crises that people talk about as well. But it's a very forced and unnatural way of things happening. Sometimes it will happen to somebody because they've got into so much trauma that that's their only way out. But I'm a really strong advocate for graceful, gradual, gentle, and powerful, profound change, so that it's part of your life. It's part of your way of living, rather than part of your way of recovering from something that's got way off track. I think that's very important, because if we carry too much trauma into the next generations, then the stories get recycled over and over again, and it's very inefficient.
Yeah. And so what we talk about is, conventionally, you kind of have the linear view of time, of you have the past and then you meet the present moment and then we go into the future. But the more that we interact with this, it's really an experience of the past and the future happening right now. And then how do we emerge new realities and potentials and futures out of being, you know, a depth of being more fully here, and by welcoming in more fully our unprocessed past and our kind of predicted, constructed future, and sort of welcoming those in and allowing new possibilities to emerge. So it's a little bit of a different relationship with time. And
it does, and it changes you. It means you actually can change the past as well as the future,
right,
in the present, which is very powerful when people have stories of the past that are locking them in the present. It's a very powerful inner technology once you understand that piece about time. That's what I've seen.
Yeah, and so I mean, obviously being here and speaking with you about Love To, and you and I have been speaking about Love to Be Well. I mean, these are projects that are actively in real time realizing this creatively oriented future. And so, we have this list of the emerging probabilities. I could share more about what that North Star looks like, but my higher excitement is that you are actively involved in, and you and I together are actively involved in projects that are right here, right now, both embodied examples of this emerging way of being and part of the process of the transition, part of the infrastructure that's facilitating the shift. And so I'd love to just speak more to those and what they're making possible and how they're modeling what others might get on board with, I suppose. If
it's very interesting listening to your framework, because it makes me realize how, with Love To, for example, we're building a new model, and at the same time which is a creative process, and then it supports the regenerative process, right, that's necessary along the way. I'd never separated those two out before. But it's very clear, and it's nice to know that we can do that, because that creates a really viable path forward, that the creative part is fulfilled and the regenerative part can be fulfilled potentially all in one enterprise. It might be different in different organizations, but that gives you a transition pathway. If you're only creative and you don't deal with the other part, I think the transition is really challenging because nobody wants to listen to you. It's like you're ahead of your time, and so you never get much traction. So that's an interesting reflection. I've never seen that so clearly before.
Yeah, I mean, we have this expansion into possibility, and then the challenge is when we expand in consciousness, all of the things that have been playing out in our experience that we haven't been conscious to come up to the surface for us to notice. So there's, it's like, I mean, I don't know if anybody's ever personally had the experience of like, I'm going to build a business and get super in shape and find the love of my life. And then all of a sudden you're eating like brownies and watching Netflix. And it's like, what happened? I thought I had this big creative vision. And that's, the personal reflection of, I feel like, that can inform what we might collectively do. If we all go to a meditation retreat and open up to possibility and go, oh my God, we could have utopia. Well, as soon as we open up to all the stuff that's been going on with human beings and all the unprocessed past, that could be a pretty quick way to start feeling deflated and crash. And so there's, how do we hold the collective North Star, which is so important, so we don't just get caught in the endless loop of processing all the time, hold the future that we might emerge, but also be in that, I get this infinity symbol of, dipping back into the trauma, pulling out the treasure from the depths, and then that informing the next iteration and wave. And then when we sort of get stuck or constricted, we dive into the stucks and the constrictions and find the next layer of unfolding, and it becomes this regenerative and generative process.
Which is a very it's a different way of living. Which is important to recognize, but it's actually a much easier way of living, and it's a much richer way of living. But I think it really takes education. It takes a lot of support. That's the main thing that I see after years of being there, sometimes every day, sometimes every week, for groups of people going through these kinds of processes, is that you need that kind of, there need to be structures that help people to be stable when they're learning new stuff and don't know exactly what's going on. Once you get used to it, it's like, oh, okay, that's what's happening. I kind of know how to deal with this, even if I don't know exactly what it's about. But in the earlier stages, that's very challenging shift. We've been so dependent as a culture on outside help for health, for example, and for jobs and for money. And everything's out there. It's the government, it's the employer, it's the doctor. They're totally responsible almost, or that's how we've lived it. So to shift to this level of self-responsibility, that's so important. and quite challenging even for people who are very ready for it, I would say.
Totally. Oh yeah. I mean, it's and we have these, it's amazing. I mean, we're so in harmony, but we have these emerging probabilities around every human being's their own doctor and their own healer, and human beings are their own bank. For example, we have that as an emerging probability. And it's not that you wouldn't have your wisdom council and you wouldn't have your support web of people who can give you perspective and insight and knowledge and wisdom. I think I already said wisdom, but you would still have scaffolding of support, right? These neural networks of feedback and support and insight and specialists and practitioners you can go to, and you
absolutely, that's the skill. You still need very skilled people because, but you're the center of it. They're not the center. And
so
once you're the center, you can pull in it. Yeah. We could just co-create it by both talking at the same time.
Yeah, so pull in, go ahead. Yeah, you pull in.
I see that once the center is in the right place, which is in you, so that you have the power to make choices and you have the power to choose what it is you want, which is your vision, which links in with the collective vision, then you need all kinds of experts around you. So, because the one thing that I'm always really concerned about is that I think it's very important that human beings have the possibility to become very expert in something, because it gives a great deal of pleasure apart from anything else. And we don't want to become all like, oh, I'm the author of everything in my life and therefore I don't need anybody. That's kind of the opposite direction. And so, yeah, that's a very interesting dance in there.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I love how we simultaneously did the same move, because there's pulling in the support and there's also pulling back our power that we've given out to you mentioned governments and institutions and doctors, and it's all of our power is in the bureaucrats and politicians and educators. And it's like, and big tech, like everybody's like, we've given all this power. Basically what I'm noticing is there is the level of self-responsibility that we're called into in this is crazy for me. I mean, a lot of days I'm waking up kicking
unlimited
and not wanting it. Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah. It doesn't matter where you go.
Yeah.
My feeling is from everywhere place that I get to,
yeah,
I feel like I'm called, or I'm calling myself as well in a way to step up to a new level of self-responsibility, which requires me also to be responsible to many more people and many other people to take more responsibility too. So it's not just me kind of hiking myself up a ladder and then looking down on all these poor people who are not responsible. We go together with it. And I don't see any end. My sense is that if I got a very big urge when I was close to the end of my life, it would just be what's going to happen in the next lifetime. Literally, it's like maybe that body wouldn't be able to handle it anymore and I need a different body. But that's a process that goes even beyond our frame of a single life.
Yeah, and we've been using, people I'm in this exploration with have been using this phrase of radical responsibility, and even to the point of every thought, every feeling, every impulse that we have taking responsibility. I mean, we are creating all of those phenomena in our consciousness. And so really just taking radical responsibility for all the stories, all the feelings, all the impulses, and stepping into our true creative power and potential in that. And this brings up loads of really fascinating questions around ethics. And if we can create anything, what do we want to create, right? We need to really be mindful of these kinds of things. And this is part of the process of the generativity and the regenerativity, is continually pulling in more and more power, and we start to reverberate and harmonize in these different frequencies that are more and more potentiated, I want to say.
Yes, and at the same time, all of that's happening in a frame of us being connected with everything. So it's that's what makes it so fascinating, because most of that possibility I'm not even experiencing, and I don't know how to touch. I'm such a tiny kind of particle of it. And at the same, it's like this both and thing, where at one level I can experience that there is a real power to human beings and there's a real connectedness, and life has so much in it. I mean, that's just a silly phrase, it's way too small, but the potential of life is so unspeakable in a way that yeah, it's humbling. It's very, very humbling to be a part of it.
I can feel myself, I can feel my myself and my views wanting to go into like being a grain of sand and also the desert. And I also kind of want to pull it more into the practical and come back to you know, to love to, and the work that you're doing and we're doing, and looking at in real time. I mean, you know, there's quite a big shift that happens when if we go in from basic survival, if we go into basic survival needs are met for every human being. I mean, our education, for example, our education system in Western culture is essentially manufacturing employees. I mean, it's built out of the Industrial Revolution. And so if basic survival needs are met and we're not just working to survive, if we are shifting into human beings are born with innate gifts to share in service to the larger interconnected whole, and how do we create ecosystems for happy, healthy, fulfilled human beings to thrive and cultivate their curiosities and pursue their passions and bring their gifts forward as an expression of beauty and pleasure and connectedness and joy of being, you know, just innate joy of being and being, you know, a sense of belonging, just to the larger whole. You know, there becomes these questions around what is the social fabric, what is the culture, what are the technologies and systems and institutions that support this kind of living where we're in harmony with all of life and the planet and even larger wholes. But maybe we'll just stick with Earth for right now, and the human experience. And so I get excited talking to you and knowing what's happening with love too, because obviously, you know, healing the planet, and also, you know, on the regenerative side, healing the planet through regenerative farming. And then also on the generative side, you know, the creative vision of people being closer to our source of food, and having access to nutrient dense food that with animals that have been raised, living happier lives, and living on a planet that's more lush and happy, right? That's the kind of generative creative vision. And so, you know, we're actively bringing this into being, and I'd love for you to share more around what's happening now.
Just kind of putting it in the context of what we've been talking about. So to me, what's interesting in Love Too in this conversation, and is very interesting in relation to this regenerative part, is that very often when we look at investing in projects to make the planet or the environment better, for example, we look at how do we go and find a piece of completely bare land, and then what do? We plant trees on it, or we do, which are the right things to do. But the current model of investment often supports people to do that who actually don't necessarily even really know what they're doing. So they may be doing it for investment purposes, which is very, very different from the people who regenerate the land for the love of the land and for the inner knowing of nature. And so in the Love Too model, what we decided is that what's important is to get the money into the hands of the people who already are doing it and have, in many cases, especially at the beginning, have been doing it for many years. So they've been through the first cycle, they've learned a lot of lessons, because those are the people who can most efficiently and effectively share their knowledge with other people. I think we have a culture which we don't even notice. I don't hear this spoken about much, where we all just dive in and do something. And I see this in business all the time. I see people saying, yeah, I want to be a business owner. And so one day they wake up and it's like, now I'm a business owner, but they don't know anything about business. And I was the same. I thought I knew about business because I've bought things and I've sold things, and that's what I thought it was. And then I realized, actually, I don't really even understand what business is. And So I feel we have this culture very often where we dive into something, we don't know much about it, we fumble around, we make films about my first year on my regenerative farm where I made all these hundreds of mistakes. And those are beautiful films, but and at the same time, they create a model where lots of other people dive in and do all of that. And the truth is that there are people all over this planet who have been doing this for years, and they could prevent a huge amount of that stuff if people are willing to listen. And I think that's very important in terms of what we were talking about, reducing the trauma. The trauma of farming, for example, is that you lose all your money, and then the snails or the crows or the possums or whatever it is eat all your crops. That's the kind of reality that people face. If they try something, they lose a lot. It's really painful. It takes years to recover. And they could have actually done it the right way in the first place. But at the moment, the people who are doing it really well have been doing it under their own funds for years. So they don't have so much capacity to go and share that. So one of the things that we have emphasized is bringing those funds to the people who are doing it, because that they can generate the most data, like, benchmarks and all the information and the support for other people to come and learn in the most efficient way. I've met people who it took them 15 years to do what now takes them 5 years. That's a very, very big difference. They're some of the best regenerative farmers in the world. So that's hugely valuable. And I think if we can start to think in this kind of way, how do we make the regeneration process not just like, oh, let's all jump on the bandwagon and let's go and mess it up, because that's what we normally do. We have this huge wave of activity, very little thought to it. We do something, it turns out it was the wrong thing, but we find out 15 years later. Why don't we really look for the right thing and grow it as fast as we can, it's still being right? Because those people, they have the spirit, they have the understanding, they have the inner culture, not only the plant this here and do that there, the kind of formula. The formula is never enough. We need that, the consciousness. They have the system and they have the consciousness. When we share the systems and the consciousness that work, then I think we have a really, really good chance of growing food, for example, that genuinely creates also fresh air and clean water and biodiversity and healthy ecosystems, the fundamentals of living on this planet, and healthy human beings. And when we look at health and well-being, and instead of putting all our attention onto sickness and waiting till somebody's in such a bad state that they're worth showing up for and paying money about, it's kind of like we have to because they're so sick, turn it around the other way and say, what are the people who are doing it really well? What are they doing? What are they doing that's working? And then find ways that gets shared and bring money to it. Because a lot of people who are doing things well don't even want to think about money because they do it for the pure enjoyment of it. But the fact is that if the money just goes to the people who kill trees, for example, for timber and for paper or whatever, but don't value living trees, we'll just continue killing trees. It's easy to kill the Amazon when the financial system supports that, and it doesn't support us to keep it alive. That's really straightforward. So we have to think about value, what we value and what's valuable now, not what was valuable 100 years ago or 200 years ago, but now, without question, fresh air, clean water, living soil that can grow abundantly nutrient-dense food, as you said, biodiversity, just healthy ecosystems and understanding of ecosystems, and that we're part of that ecosystem, and healthy human beings, healthy animals, all of that, without question, stands in front of us now as the most valuable thing on the planet. Everything else, to me, can wait. Gold, diamonds, which used to be the most valuable things, and a lot of other stuff. And we need to look at how our energy systems, how our educational systems, our government and organizational systems all put what's most valuable for life in the center, And then from there, we can embroider and we can create all kinds of really creative and funky things that people love to do that satisfy all the weirdnesses of human beings. But let's put the right things in the middle.
Yeah, so well said. So well said. And so let's dive in more to the consciousness and the systems. I mean, you already are, but I like the shift into regenerative consciousness is pretty profound. I mean, part of the shift in this article I'm writing is, we have sustainable development goals, but to me, sustainable just means crashing slower, essentially. I mean, right? It's like,
well, we mostly don't want to sustain where we are, because where we are isn't that great.
Right, exactly. And so how do we actually dip into the pain points and resolve, you and I have talked about this. I define trauma as residual from an experience that we couldn't be fully present with in the moment that it was happening. And so how can we open up to and be present with, whether it's in our individual life, our family life, intergenerationally, culturally, in the interconnected whole. I mean, wherever it is, trauma seems to be a never-ending wormhole, but there's always more seemingly. But how can we be more fully present with that which we weren't able to be in the moment it was happening, and then open up and allow the future that's wanting to emerge now to have its way through us. And it brings on massive, well, go ahead. It seems like you got a hit there. So
yes, it's a really interesting challenge, because what I've observed, and I think this happens at individual levels and also at collective levels, is that we, because of the way we're living now, and I don't necessarily criticize it, it's just what's evolved so far, we tend to wait until we're really scared before we take action. And often the fear sabotages that action anyway, because fear is not a really good motivator. It'll push you for a little while, and the minute you feel you're kind of more or less safe, you'll tend to revert back to old behaviors. So I've seen that a lot, and I've worked with it a lot. I don't think it's a successful model to wait for things to get so bad that you have to change. And I also have seen that, and every government has seen that generally trying to persuade people to do the right thing, whatever it is only very mildly successful, and often really quite unsuccessful. The good thing, in a way, ironically, is that the media has done a fantastic job of making everybody realize that where we are now is an awful place. And the alternative media, for those who follow it, have done a fantastic job of pointing out just how awful it is. So whether you get to the mainstream media and you think that we've all just about died from a pandemic, or you get to the alternative media that says, well, that was manipulated, and all the stuff that goes with that, at one level doesn't really matter, because they're all playing with the same story. And it's made us realize that where we are is not working well. I think everybody knows that. And they've done it with climate, they've done it with health. There are other things, like it doesn't really matter, and war, of course. So whichever way we look, we now know collectively that we're in a really bad place. I think that's very useful, because I think that slowly people start to look for something better. It was very interesting recently. I'm about to run a course on a big platform, and they've said people do not want we're in the middle of a shit show, how can you manage it? They don't want that. They want to go into the future, a better future. And I think there is a growing hunger for stories that are real, that are genuinely possible, like relatable, not fluffy, oh, if we could live in this beautiful, wonderful world, but there's no connection to it, but genuine, grounded, real solutions that are not, as you said right from the beginning, they're not about solving the massive problems. They're actually about creating a world that we resonate with and that feels right inside us as human beings, because I think we know that it doesn't feel right. It's like everything's a bit out of sync with itself. Even if you don't, I know you and I probably know a lot of stuff that would explain why it's out of sync. But I think even if you don't know any of that stuff, it's just like, this is not how it's supposed to be. So I believe that telling the story of a future that you would love to live, and us telling stories of a future that we would love to live, that invite people into that future, and invite people not into Sarah's version of the future. So Sarah's going to lead the charge, which is a very old model, and then we're all going to follow, and then we're going to realize that we got disenfranchised again. But also it's not Sarah pretending she's just going to facilitate the future for everyone else, because I'm a human being, you're a human being, there, everyone else is. We all want our piece of it, but we also want to be connected together with it. I think those stories are really important, and that we're not hearing much of that at all anywhere. When I start to speak about love to people, the most tangible thing that I see, and the word they use most often, is relief. It's literally like their body says, oh, there's something that I could not just try to believe in, and not just believe in. It's like, here are some people who are doing something that feels right, that sounds right, that somehow deals with my underlying fears, where I think, oh, the world is just falling apart and there's nothing, I'm too small to do anything about it. It calms all of that down. And I watch people just like, oh, I really needed that. We need more of that. I think it just needs to become louder and louder and louder. I've been looking at there's a kind of newspaper, or it's like an online digital thing, which is it's sort of quite right wing in a way, but it's quite interesting. It has some quite good reporting in it, which is called the Epoch Times. But what fascinates me is they have this little section called positive news, and it usually has a recipe in it and then some little health and well-being tip. And I'm thinking, really? Wow. Is that all you can find as positive news? You're not even willing to use your journalism to go and find a really hefty, powerful story of somebody doing something that's solving all these problems that you're writing about in your news, your negative news.
Yeah. We'll send them this recording. I mean,
good idea.
Yeah. I mean, sincerely, yeah. And it's, I mean, for me, I mean, I feel the same way when you talk about love too. I'm just like, oh, thank goodness, right? Total relief. And for me, it's so profound, the shift away from fighting the old and the system, the embodied experience we have when we're going to war with what we don't like, versus, oh, here's just a new possibility, a potential that I can get behind, and it solves all the challenges, but I don't have to put any energy into getting rid of the old. I can just invest all my energy into emerging the new, and that's so generative and regenerative. I mean, that in itself is healing, and we're actively going about the generative process of bringing about the future that we, the future that we want to live in, and being the change we want to see.
Well, what's really important to understand is, once you get behind a story of the future, which is essentially what you want to create, or what you want to contribute to, or what you want to experience, that's all it is, really. Once you really kind of almost lock into that, you have this North Star, like you're talking about, where this is the thing that I stand for, this is what I value so much, and this is the piece that I'm going to play in that, which might be a tiny little piece. We're all playing tiny little pieces, really. What happens then is, yes, there's stuff to clean up, but you know how you know that? Because you have problems. It's really simple. You're about, if in business terms, you're about to do a deal and it all falls apart, and then you have to clean up a whole lot of stuff to get the deal back on the table, and be friends again, or whatever it is you have. Or if it's in a family context, that you're all going along and everything's fine, happy family, everything's much better than it used to be, because there's this sense of vision now, and then suddenly one of the kids is sick, or you have a fight, or just the normal stuff that happens in life. Those, to me, are the moments where that's like life telling me, okay, Sarah, here's something you need to deal with. You cannot go further in your vision without cleaning up this mess that you've got here. It's not your fault, you haven't done anything wrong, but it's shouting at you, it's hurting. If it's hurting, do you want to carry it? Do you want to walk on staunchly, like hurting and getting more and more pain? Or do you want to say, this is an opportunity to clean something up that is actually preventing me from being able to move forward smoothly. And so we do that. And what I found is every time you do that, you get stronger for it. And so you're better as you move forward. Whereas if you carry that pain, like I think many of us, especially older, a little bit older than you, we've trained ourselves to just walk with pain. And so we can just say, it doesn't matter, I'll grit my teeth and just keep going forward because I've got to keep going forward. And it gets more and more painful, but we get better and better at gritting our teeth. That's definitely a generational thing. It's not a good model. It's really not. I've learned that feeling good and enjoyment are very important parts of that creative process. And that means we have to clean up the mess, basically.
Yeah, and so what's coming up for me now is inviting people to, I'm going to be sharing this with my folks and welcome you to share this with folks. And I wonder, having people plug in. I mean, we've got our incubator running. If folks have projects and passions and visions for this future that they want to bring into being, then we've got the accelerator that we've created. You have your book, Love Money, Money Loves You. People can plug into this consciousness through your book, going to love2.group. Our incubator website right now is lightinaction.co. But for folks who are listening to this and want to plug in, I'm curious specifically to talk with you about how it seems like I'm meeting more and more people who are financially well resourced and want to support this collectively held North Star. And so I hope that you and me and Sushant and maybe Jeff can get together and talk about what an investment fund and other ways that other systems that are born from the consciousness that's supporting and resourcing this generative future and this process of regenerating in through the transition. Like how I guess I've said all that, but the question coming from me now is maybe to ask you, how does money want to support what we're speaking about here?
First of all, a lot, a lot. This is so interesting because when I wrote the book, Love Money, Money Loves You, there's a little bit in it where it says that the money system itself is shifting. And this is not really the money system on the planet, but it affects what's on the planet. It's more like the energy of money behind what happens on the planet. It was indicating that we're shifting away from a world where it was more about what you wanted for yourself kind of thing to more what kind of world do we want to live in, what's the change we want to see in the world. And I'm beginning to see that. It's 10 years now, or a little over 10 years since I wrote the book, and I'm really beginning to see this happen. For a while it felt like we were still very much in the old way, which was more like that manifestation of the house and the dream. This is still the dream, but it's a dream life. And it's got a much more of a collective sense. So there's a definite sense that money, will increasingly become more generous in this space. We're seeing that because, first of all, we can see that there's a lot of mandated investment into it, actually. And one of the reasons we created Love To was because there's very little investment gets made into environmental and social well-being because the projects and the businesses don't meet the requirements of the financial institution. So I think that there is money there. I think that the people who have the ability to create businesses that are scalable, that have good governance, that can meet the requirements of large-scale finance must do that. They must really step up and do that and create systems that will enable people who are never going to think like that to also work in a way that is sovereign, that's powerful, that's responsible, and that's accountable and generous in the contributions that we can make to each other, enable that to happen through the systems that we create. And that's one thing I think about a lot with Love To, is how can we create a system where all those people who do good work, all the people in the healing and coaching and farming and, I don't know, volunteering and preventing forest fires, and there's so many different things, just so many good people. How can we create a system where they don't have to go and do all the work that I need to do to make that bigger system, but they can plug into something? The money will flow because they're creating value. They are so undervalued at the moment, often doing things for free most of the time. How do we shift so that this goodwill, I mean, the rise in coaching is such a fascinating thing. It is people wanting to help people live a better life. I wonder why that's happening now. It's so interesting because we need it so much. We need that kind of support, but those people need to be well resourced. And I feel our responsibility as business owners, if we possibly can, is to create systems that make it work for as many people as possible. Financially, it's food, it's finance, it's all the essentials, and then the creative abundance that sits on top of the survival.
Yeah, the third word I heard was frequency. food, finance, and frequency.
Perfect.
Yeah. Yeah. So okay. So we've given a few ways that folks can plug in, and then yeah, I mean, so what feels most alive in me, what feels most exciting for me, is inviting, you know, more folks into the conversation of collectively resourcing this North Star that we collectively are emerging together and holding together, and then also seeing how do money and other resources and forms of nourishment want to, you know, for me, we've been using this term metacelium for the incubator. It's like the support infrastructure, the communication infrastructure, the nourishment of the emerging ecosystem. That, you know, we're looking at the underground infrastructure that's supporting the processes, information processing, financial information that's bringing sustenance and resourcing the emerging ecosystem. So there's, depending on what perspective you want to take and how you want to look at it, there's supporting the infrastructure that's supporting the emerging ecosystem, supporting the supporters of this emerging way of being, both in the consciousness and the systems, institutions, and cultures, bringing about the social fabric for what the next wave of consciousness might manifest on the planet, how we might organize ourselves. And then, and I just get, there's this bit for me around, we've had this vision of like a refinement fund, or I get this vision of like a spiral where money and resources from, you might call it the old world, can be invested into like a fund that consciously works with money and is in a refinement process to do the regenerative work to generate and support and invest in this emerging future. And so I want to plant that seed with you as well, because this feels like somewhere where we really might be able to explore further, and where I'd love to be able to invite large groups of people to say there's actually, again, another real tangible thing happening here where people can put resources into a funnel that is midwifing the new world into being.
Yeah, I think you're tapping into my energy there.
Okay.
You're describing something that is already in formation.
Okay, beautiful.
And we're
Great.
actually even looking at a way that even cryptocurrency can pass through that. It's very exciting. Like, there is a vision that's a bit further away that I have, but I think it's just worth explaining briefly in this context. The way that we think in Love To is that people who create real value get rewarded for that real value. There's a piece that I want to crack where investors who create real value through their investment get the return is higher because of the value that they're creating by investing in real value. Okay. It's a bit circular, but it's clearly right. Totally. It's clearly how money actually works. How we do that at a mechanical level, you know, we've still got to work out, but I think that we're more than 50% there. conceptually that this is a really doable thing. Can you imagine if the best investments in the world were the ones that create the most, what I call real value, living value, because they do that, not because of because of the kind of vagaries of the market, but because of the value that they're creating, that additional value accrues to that investment. To me, that is the holy grail of the heart of an economy that functions for us. And that's the piece that I am so determined that we get to.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to just the holy grail of the center of the piece of the economy that we're in.
That's a bit of a long sentence, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, but Anne, I just want to double click on that and see if there's, I mean, you know, for me, there's something there around, I'm taking concrete resources I have and energetic resources I have, attention, intention, and weaving that into a project that's all coming from a place of being in service to the larger whole and sharing what I have in support of what's wanting to emerge for more flourishing and a greater experience for all, right? So it's coming from a certain place. We're giving the best of what we have in service of that. I mean, of course, that's going to be rewarded in the emerging economy.
Yes, but what I see, there's a piece which is where, because it's so valuable, there's an additional value piece. I'm not going to say more about it now. I just say that whenever I touch him with this is the most beautiful energy that I have ever experienced in my life. And who would imagine it? It's in this, like right in the heart of the money system itself, which is somehow really tied in with life. It's how we fuel our contribution and our purpose, essentially, to be shared amongst all of us on the planet. So it lies right at the heart of our lives. Yeah, it is so, it's difficult to share it, and it's so beautiful that I just feel very, very called to create it. So yes, I would love to continue that conversation, and definitely we are close to having the first version of what you're talking about, I reckon. And when I say close, probably just months away, possibly even closer, actually. So
feeling, well, first of all, certain things happen when you touch into the energy you're talking about, even if you can't language it yet. It's pretty palpable for me.
It's it's so it's really exquisite is just even not a good enough word for it.
Yeah, and I feel so much appreciation and just excitement hearing that we're potentially months away from a working example of what we're wandering into here. So
yes, many conversations to be had, I would say, in the future.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, maybe this one's complete for now. Is there anything else you want to share before I end the recording?
I think that I'm done.
Okay.
And
yeah,
I also have a session to run at 10 o'clock, at my 10 o'clock, which is now. So I'm going to have to go fairly. Thank you. That was really, really worthwhile.
Yeah.
And these conversations are very, very important. Would you share the original recording with me? Because I think it would be worth taking a clip from it as well to lead to the whole thing.
Yeah.
Because we took a little while, sort of at the beginning, kind of getting into it, and I want people to make sure they go through that to come to, yeah. I mean, it's all really interesting, very timely. I better go, but yeah, I'll definitely share it, and I'll put it on my YouTube channel. I'm happy to link it from yours or whatever. But I think we could share a smaller clip somewhere on Facebook or whatever as well. Why not?
I'll send it to you right now. That sounds great.
Brilliant. Thanks, Forrest. I will see you soon. Okay. Well. Hey, I just want to say, what we're talking about, and this might suit you much better, you might be kind of like a cap for that fund. Ariana might be the cap for the farming. You might be the cap on the fund side, because I think that that's where your heart actually lies. I think you're really interested in this whole money piece. Yeah. Just kind of circulate that. We're not there yet, but that's what we're building.
Beautiful.
Okay. Thank you.
See you.
Bye.
Bye.